Would you like to begin?
Sure.
Well, good morning. I'd like to start off by saying thank you all for attending today's webinar. My name is Beryl Cook, and I'm one of the Education Support Specialists here at Families Helping Families. I'd also like to take a minute to introduce my coworkers, Wallace Johnson, who will be assisting us with today's webinar, as well as Ms. Melinda Elliott, our LACAN leader. She's going to take a minute to share with you guys some information about LACAN. Miss Melinda, you have the
I don't
floor.
know about it being a minute. I usually talk a little bit longer than that, but
It's okay.
thank you so much, Beryl. So I'm the LACAN leader in Region 5. That's Beauregard, Allen, Calcasieu, Jeff Davis, and Cameron Parish. Just like the local Families Helping Families Center. I am one of 9 people that are called team leaders across the state. We work on legislative issues for children with developmental disabilities as well as uh, education issues. We have a legislative agenda every year. Y'all just missed it. We just went, well, maybe some of y'all were there. We just finished our legislative roundtable. We did a hybrid um, option where we had a room full of people, and then we had just as many, if not a little bit more, on the Zoom during the presentation. We have 3 things that we're working on this year. We are working on continued funding for Families Helping Families, and hopefully making that funding permanent part of the budget. This is, if you've been around for at least a few years, this will be the 4th year that we've gone back to them. Um, it had been almost 2 decades before that since we had gotten an increase in funding through the Louisiana Developmental Disabilities Council. The price of everything has skyrocketed in that short amount of time. Insurance is beyond belief. But anyway, that's one of the things that we're working on, the funding that they had helped us with the past 3 years and making it a permanent part of the budget. We're also working on eliminating the Flexible Family Fund waiting list. This affects parents of children with the most severe disabilities. So it's not every child that might be on the waiver waiting list. Not that they're already not severe enough, but it's a subgroup of those that are the most severe that would get a monthly stipend to be able to help keep their child at home, to pay for respite, extra therapy, ABA, personal care needs, to pay the electricity. Some of our parents have difficulty working and maintaining work because they have to have time off to tend to their children during the day. But yeah, it's going to take, I believe, $9.1 million to eliminate that waiting list. And not everybody you get on the list, and then when it's your turn, you get qualified. So not everybody on the list is going to qualify. But to get rid of the people, to help the people that are on the list at this point in time, it will be $9.1 million. The third thing is there's a great disparity in rates for the home and community-based waiver for people with developmental disabilities between night and day. There's like a $5 difference. And if you like me and you've been around a little bit of time, you know that most jobs in the evening at night pay a little bit more money because people don't typically want to work in the evening and at night. That's not possible for the providers if they're getting $5 less for people that work at night. These are people that have a waiver that have been approved for a waiver, that have been approved for night services. So this isn't all the people across the state that have a waiver. There's about 3,000 that have been approved for night services. That will take $10 million to raise those rates, even with other waivers, by the way, that don't have that disparity in day and night rates. So what do you do with LACAN? You sign up. I know Wallace, he already dropped the link in the chat box. I don't even have to check. It's free. You're agreeing to get emails. Of course, when you see something that's important to you or people that you know, I'm gonna in our emails, we're gonna be asking you to do something. Typically contact your legislators. Some of you are gonna have a story about things that have to do with our legislative agenda, and you might want to tell your story. The roundtable's gone. That was one of the opportunities, but we have individual visits. We have yellow shirt days at the Capitol where we wear our yellow shirts in support. But we also have people that we select to come to the Capitol because they don't want to, the legislators don't want to hear 1,000 people if they can help it. But we select some really good stories. Yours might be one of those. But my job is to hook you up with your legislator. He wants to talk to you. He doesn't want to talk to me. And you can contact me. I'm at the Families Helping Families office, and we could talk about it some more or just sign up. I'm good, Beryl.
Okay, thanks so much, Melinda.
Thank you.
Today, we are pleased to welcome our very special guest speakers, Chris Champagne and Tracy O'Donnell from LASARD. Today, they're going to be sharing with us their expertise on meeting the challenges of challenging behaviors. This webinar is being recorded and all lines are muted. So please, if you can hold your questions or put them in the chat box, you will have some time at the end of the presentation for Q&A. So at this time, I ask that you just give your full attention to our guest speakers. Go ahead, Ms. Chris and Tracy, all good.
Thank you so much for having us this morning. And I'm going to share my screen so you can see our PowerPoint slides. I'm going to let Chris go first to introduce herself, and then we'll get started.
Age before beauty, right, Tracy? So
No.
hi, everybody. My name is Chris Champagne. I have been with the LASARD project since 2007 and have worked in lots of schools across the state. My previous career, I was an early interventionist. For a little bit, I was a preschool teacher. And for the last several decades, I've been doing teacher training in several different states. So I love my job at LASARD, and we are thrilled to have the opportunity to speak to you today.
Fantastic. And my name is Tracy O'Donnell. This is my first year with LASARD. And I have come from being a high school teacher all the way down to being an interventionist for early childhood up to 3rd and 4th and 5th grade. Then I was an instructional coach and finishing out my first sort of 20-year career in the school systems as an IEP facilitator. So this is very exciting because we get to share with you. I've been on both sides of the table. I have worked with Families Helping Families for my previous district for years. I love this organization. I love the ability for there to be advocates and great conversation. And you, Families Helping Families, along with their families that they work with, really, I've seen fantastic changes in schools and really doing what we here at the LASARD Project and at the Human Development Center, and it's doing what's best for kids. So I'm very excited to present today with you with my colleague, Chris, and let's go ahead and get started. So we are now part of the Human Development Center. LASARD is, the Louisiana Autism Spectrum and Related Disabilities Project. The Human Development Center is part of LSU Health in New Orleans, and we are a USAID for the state, which means that we help families, organizations, schools, and we offer programs for all different students with disabilities and their families. So I'm going to show you a real quick video that sort of tells you a little bit more about what we do at the
To
Human
achieve
Development
a
Center.
self-determined life, an individual with disabilities requires the combined support of their family, the professionals who serve them, policymakers and elected officials, as well as their community. But success is only possible when everyone works together with the individual at the center. We build the capacity of communities to create the changes needed for individuals with developmental disabilities to fully participate in all aspects of community life. We are the Human Development Center at the LSU Health Sciences Center. To achieve a self
And so we have multiple outreach programs and initiatives as part of the Human Development Center. We start with early childhood and with early childhood initiatives. Here is our group, the LASARD program, which we are typically K to 12. We also partner with the Louisiana Deaf Blind Project. When your students become ready for post-secondary transitioning, we also have the LSU Paycheck program, as well as some employment first trainings. We work with WIPA and LEND for community health, and then IPP, split second cares, and we also have started a FASD support initiative as well. So at the Human Development Center, we can offer programming and assistance to school systems, to community partners from birth all the way through until their post-secondary transition and community in development. Okay, here is our website. This is the Human Development Center website, and this is you are going to have access to our slide deck if you want to utilize this later on to reach out and see if there are any needs that we can help you with. This is our team at LASARD. We work with school systems from the very tip top of the state. That we actually have one school system that I believe branches into Arkansas, and then all the way close to Texas, all the way down to Port Sulphur and South Plaquemines Parish. So we reach out across the entire state and work with school districts across all of Louisiana. Here are some resources that are for you. These are our online resources. They are completely free. This is our website, www.lasard.org. And if you click here on this drop-down menu right here, it will open up to free resources, and we even have them customized for family resources as well as educator resources. We also have at the top here a new feature that's not in this picture, and it's called Ask LASARD. And if you click on that link and you ask a question, one of our LASARD facilitators will get back to you personally to answer that. So we have some pretty neat things that are always free and always available for you 24/7.
Tracy, I was just going to say, when we contract with districts too, they generally purchase so many logins to the website. So to the general public, there's a lot of free resources. When we actually have a paying district, there is actually coursework that we can recommend for the teachers in the district that we can pair with some of the coaching and the job embedded coaching that we do with the teachers.
Absolutely. And so this is a Google Drive right here that you can scan with your phone if you have it available. If not, I've already put the link in the chat box. And this Google Drive is going to give you access to every document that we're going to talk about today. It's also going to give you access to our slide deck. So if you want to think about some things later on, or something comes up, or for example, you're rolling into an IEP with a school and you're discussing behavior, it's going to give you a lot of resources that you can utilize, including an FBA checklist, a behavior intervention plan checklist, and some other really neat goodies. And if after attending this webinar, something comes up later on, please go to our website, click Ask LASARD, let them know. We're going to also provide you with our email addresses. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us, because we love being able to help families and school systems come together for the betterment of students. Okay. At the end of today, you're going to understand the basics of behavior and effective strategies for dealing with that. We want you to be able to also, when you leave here, recognize some key components of quality FBAs, which we call functional behavior analyses, and BIPs, behavior intervention plans. We also want to give you some tips and tools for communicating with your school team and vice versa. I know that there are families on here as well as maybe some school district employees. So we want to really help you guys have positive and productive conversations when you have these meetings. So what's the big idea? The big idea that is that if your students are engaged in learning, they're not engaging in challenging behavior. And that is true at home as well as at school. If your child is engaged in whatever that is, they are not going to engage in challenging behavior. Behaviors have functions, and we're going to talk about that a little more later. So, all right, now I want you to self-assess yourself. One would be that you're totally new to this and you have no knowledge whatever about behavior basics. 3 would be like, I'm kind of in the middle and I have some understandings about behavior basics. Or 5 is going to be you are an expert and you can teach other people about behavior basics and strategies to use. So I want to give you just a couple of seconds to think about that for yourself, and then we'll move on. And our goal for today is to hopefully move that number. If you're at a 1, we want you to be at a 3. If you're at a 3, we want you to get closer to a 5, right? So the first thing is the functions of behavior. We do know that if a student consistently engages in that challenging behavior, they're doing it because it's meeting a need for them. It's working for them. They're either getting something that they want or they're avoiding something that they don't want. All behavior is a form of communication. That's what behavior is. It starts when our children are tiny, tiny infants, and their only way to communicate with us is through cries or coos or movement. All behavior is a form of communication. And so how we motivate our students and how we reinforce that behavior is critical if we want our students to not engage in challenging behaviors and engage in socially appropriate behaviors, or basically, in a nutshell, getting them to do what we want them to do. Also, it's important to know that all behaviors serve a function. That word can also be interchanged with purpose. And so once we understand what that purpose is and what that function is for that behavior, no matter what the behavior is, whether it is yelling, screaming, biting, hitting, we're going to go through a lot of concrete examples for you today so that you can see anything from when your student's being a people pleaser to giving you a smile. That is a function for them. They want you to smile back. They want to continue those positive interactions. So we're going to talk a lot about the ABCs this morning. So what happens before a behavior we call the antecedent? That's the A. What's that trigger? The B stands for behavior. What is the behavior? And the C is the consequence or the outcome, whether it's positive or negative. Understanding what the behavior is, if you understand the A, which is the antecedent or the trigger, you can be proactive there. You understand the C and the consequence. So the way to manipulate the behavior is to really understand how we can alter the A and the C part. So here's an example. The behavior is that Cassie runs out of the room. The antecedent was the paraeducator asked Cassie to check her schedule. Cassie ran out the room, and so the activity was delayed. That was the consequence. So we can think about this in a way that, did Cassie get what she wanted? If Cassie was trying to avoid that behavior, if Cassie was trying to avoid that schedule or that upcoming activity, running out the room really paid off, right? Here's another example. Start with the B, behavior. Abe grabs the arm of the teacher and bites him. The antecedent is the teacher told him it was time to leave a preferred activity. Maybe Abe was playing outside and was on his favorite tricycle. Maybe Abe is an older student and Abe was watching YouTube. But the teacher said it's time to stop. And for you guys, if you're family members, mom, dad, caregiver, you told Abe, time's up. I now need you to do something else. Abe grabs the arm and bites you. What happens at that point? Usually you're stunned, you back off, and Abe gets to continue his activity. So what are the chances that Abe is going to continue to bite next time he's told it's time to get off that iPad? Pretty high. Last example, Gene strips off his clothes. Gene and his peers finish lunch. Gene stripped off his clothes. His peers laughed at him. This particular behavior, Gene probably wanted attention, and he got that attention. So the chances are we have to change some things, and we have to change sort of what that consequence is going to be in order to change Gene's behavior. All right, so you always want to intervene first at the antecedent. That's the easiest place to intervene. That's the easiest place to change, and that's the most proactive thing we can possibly do. So we don't have to intervene here for the consequence. So here's what I want you to think about. And I'm going to give you the answer, but I want you to read this and think to yourself. So during reading stations, Andy's supposed to work independently on a reading worksheet. Andy throws things, pencils and paper, at his peers and says, "You stink," to the teacher. The other students stop reading and they laugh at Andy, and the teacher reprimands Andy. So what was the actual behavior? Because we want to identify that first. The behavior was that Andy throws pencils and paper at his peers, and he says, "You stink," to the teacher. So what we're doing right now in this real quick activity is we are basically breaking apart this ABC. And you're going to see in a second why this is important to look at behavior this way. The antecedent was that the student was given independent work. It's very likely that the student did not want to get that independent work or didn't want to complete it. It could also be that the student wants attention, but we have to figure out what that function is. And the consequence was that the peers laughed at the student. So why is this important? Because behavior is functional. The important part of finding out the function of the behavior is that then we can make adjustments to change that behavior. Here's some examples and what you want to ask yourself when you're trying to determine the function. First is, what's the student accessing? What's the student getting out of this behavior? Or what's the student avoiding or escaping? Because it's going to be one of the two things. They're either going to want to avoid or escape something, or they're going to want to get something. So challenging behaviors, when you're trying to obtain or get something or escape or avoid something, it could be something tangible like an activity or a toy or a food item or something like that. It can also be for attention, or it could be sensory oriented, in which case it's kind of automatic and we want to figure out a different way to fulfill that sensory need for the child. So then we look at reinforcement. If the student is accessing or gaining something by his behavior, then we want to give some positive reinforcement. If the student's trying to avoid or escape something, that's negative reinforcement. So common functions. To obtain or get, you could get peer attention, adult attention, a desired activity or object or items, or again, that sensory stimulation. They really need to feel something, or they like to utilize their hands, or they want to move around, that sort of thing. If they're trying to avoid or escape, it's usually a difficult task. It could be because they're bored. It could be because it's too easy. It could be because it's physically demanding. It could be that they just don't like it. It could be they're trying to avoid a particular peer or a particular staff, or they're trying to avoid some type of a reprimand. So one behavior can serve several different functions. This is where it can get a little complicated. Here's some examples. For example, hitting. Hitting could be to gain sensory input, to escape a difficult task, to gain attention from peers, or to gain access to something like a game or a toy. So it's really important when you're trying to break down why or what the function of the behavior is to figure out which one it is. And if it's multiple ones, then we sort of need to break off and determine which one we're going to attack first. If it's eloping, which is the same, that's just a fancy term for running off. Is it to escape noise? Do they only run off when things are really loud? Is it to escape a boring activity? I am in pre-K classrooms all the time, and they'll have a cute little runner, and that little thing is so adorable. And it's that he just doesn't want to sit in the circle time anymore, and he likes being chased a lot more. And so that can also be it, gaining attention from an adult for chasing them, or getting something tangible, or going to another classroom. Those can all be functions of running off. If they're screaming, that's another one that we see a lot, especially in either younger children, or if it's a behavior that hasn't been dealt with or hasn't been reinforced in a different way to get their needs met, it can continue. And as students become older, screaming really becomes something that's not socially acceptable in certain situations. So we really want to help our students be able to behave appropriately, or give them an avenue to get that screaming out if it's a sensory thing. So escaping from a sensory overload, right? I don't know if you guys have ever been in a situation, I know that I have, where sometimes you get home at the end of the day, or a whole bunch of things happen at once, and you just need to go outside and get a little scream out. Escaping from a setting that they don't like the morning meeting, gaining attention from peers or adults. Because if you think about it, that's a lot what happens with toddlers and with like babies. They scream and you give them your full attention. So that works for a long time. Or gaining access to a tangible item like an iPad or a toy or something like that. So it's important in this process to collect some observational data. And this is where I'm going to let Chris start talking about that observational data.
Thank you, Tracy. This is just another way to kind of get a picture of what's going on in the classroom. And like Tracy said, or what's going on in your home. You have to be a detective, because unless you can figure out why they're doing what they're doing, and what is keeping it going, if there's a behavior that's persisting, it's being supported by something in the environment. So you have to figure out, what's setting it up, what's setting them off, and then what is the payoff. If you're going to figure out a better, more functional, more positive, more socially appropriate way for them to get the same thing that this behavior you don't like is getting for them, right? So this is the kind of thing when we go into a classroom, we would do, and this, you can do an informal version of this at home too. It's like, what is the setting? What happened immediately before the behavior? And in this case, the teacher asked the student to log off the computer. And this is a real common one. I know home and school, they're on the iPad, they're looking at YouTube or whatever, and it's time for them to transition to something that's not as preferred as what they were doing. And so you get some kickback for that, right? Many times they don't listen and they maintain the activity that they want to do. A lot of times what happens is we'll get into the continuing to verbally prompt, which in and of itself, if you think about it, is still getting the student what they want. They want more time on that computer, and those continual verbal prompts with no action paired with them, they don't mind that because they're getting what they want, more time. So this is just one way that you can look at that and kind of see what was the chain of events. This is actually a chain of behaviors, where it started, how it escalated, what made that happen, so that you can then be the good detective you need to be. Okay. Okay. And once you look at that, you're going to make your best guess. You're going to say, in the previous example, well, I'm pretty positive that it's not so much to escape what's coming next. It's more to continue to obtain time on the computer, right? And so your best guess might be something like, when asked to get off of the computer or to get off of YouTube, the student or your child yells and throws things because once that behavior occurs, the nagging starts, but they're allowed to continue to stay on the computer, right? So the function is to obtain or gain more time of a preferred activity, which is the computer. So once we know that, then our job is to find a good behavior, a socially appropriate behavior to replace it, right? It needs to be easy for them to do. It needs to be something they're capable of doing. It needs to be efficient, because screaming and throwing is pretty efficient, right? And once you determine what that is, you might have to, and you usually will have to specifically teach that behavior, and it needs to be easy. So in the case that we just talked about, if the student uses words, you could give them a choice and say, do you need a few more minutes? And they might say yes, and you could set a timer and says, okay, you can have a few more minutes. When this goes off, then we're going to do something else. In these particular instances, you may find that you can make that transition from a highly preferred to something else if that something else is also pretty preferred. It may not be as preferred as YouTube, but it could be something like, especially if you're kind of bogged down in this, I'm going to give you another minute on YouTube, and then it's going to be time for a snack. So that would be something like, oh, they might be willing to make that transition. So you just have to kind of be smart about it and figure out what might make that transition more possible for them. So we're going to talk a little bit about the phases of behavior now. And I love this graphic because this is how this bell curve, which is that big thing in the center, is how we all get anxious. You know, something happens that triggers us. Tracy talked about the trigger or the antecedent. And then we begin to get agitated. And if things don't happen to calm us, or if we continue to be annoyed and agitated, like repeated cues to do something that I'm not interested in, then that agitation could escalate until we're really at the point where that temper tantrum or that meltdown is resulting in just nothing can be done at that point besides keeping somebody safe. So this is a great way to look at your behavior plans and to help your schools look at behavior plans. That bell curve is the curve of the individual who's upset. The one Tracy's pointing to at the bottom, that barely curve, that's where you and I have to stay. We can't join them in that anxiety. We have to be in that just right place. We have to stay calm. We have to model for them the behavior we want them to show us. So we're going to go through this. We're going to talk about some do's and don'ts at stages of that. And again, that can be a behavior plan. This is your choreography. This is what everybody needs to know to prevent that behavior from reaching a 5. So when the trigger occurs, or let's back up a little bit. When they're at a 1, which is the very bottom of that just fine place, and you know that something is going to occur that has triggered them in the past, maybe it's a non-preferred activity or whatever, but when they're at a 1, they're in a good spot. Okay, Trace, go back. So at that point, that's when you want to help them. You might want to use some priming, okay? You might want to use your visual supports because they're in a place where they can hear you then, right? They're in a great spot. You're going to say, in a minute, we're going to do this. Or when we get done with this, if you finish this work that I'm about to give you, you will earn this. So you're priming them for what's about to happen. And you're doing it at a point in time when they can listen to you. Then the agitation might start, right? Say you didn't do this didn't happen, and they're continued to being asked to do, or whatever the trigger is continuing to eat at them, right? So they look like they're getting anxious, they're worried, they're getting angry, they're getting upset. Some kids might withdraw first. They look more and more frustrated, right? you as parents know what these behaviors look like in your kids. Teachers need to learn this. You know, do they bundle their fist? I had one kid that kind of wiped his hands on the front part of his pants. You know, do they make a certain face? What are some things that let you know that they are becoming agitated so that you can then implement some preventive strategies right then before they start getting up to the level 5? So some things you can do at that stage is you can offer empathy. You can say, you know, I know this is difficult for you, but I'm going to help you through it. Or I know this is difficult for you, but I'm going to only ask you to do the first 2. So at that point, you kind of read the student and you kind of figure out how am I going to lessen or eliminate this trigger. And what we tell teachers when we go into schools is take a look at it. Is this something that the student absolutely has to do? Or at home, is this something they absolutely have to do? Or can that be altered in some way? And then you eventually may expect that same thing, but maybe for a little while you alter that requirement in some way to make it possible for them to comply with you. My screen is blocking some of my slides, so I'm just gonna. So some other things you might do. You might lessen what you're requiring them to do, so that then they get to engage in a preferred activity. You might provide some movement activities, some give them an opportunity to do something independent. Maybe they're a drawer, they like to draw, they like to listen to music. We're going to show you in a little bit some self-regulation strategies. Can they take some deep breaths? Can they do some other things that help them to relax? Can they make a choice, which then makes them feel more in control of whatever it is they're being asked to do? So those are some ways to lessen the anxiety. If those things don't help, or if they don't happen, or if they don't help, you're going to see that the overall behavior is then going to get more pronounced and they're going to get a little more agitated. They may start to argue. They may start to refuse to work. They may begin to do some property destruction, like we saw in some of the scenarios where they might begin to throw something, actively interfering with instruction. I have kids who get frustrated and they just crumble up the worksheet and throw it away. So those kinds of things. And when they get to this stage, this is kind of your last chance. So it's important to know what you can do and what you definitely need to avoid doing at this stage. So you want to avoid escalating prompts. If what you asked them to do was the trigger in the first place, you don't want to keep nagging at that. That's not going to get you anywhere. You might say to them, I'm going to take some deep breaths. I'm starting to get anxious. So you're kind of narrating for them. I'm starting to get anxious. I'm going to stop for a minute and take some deep breaths. I kind of need a break. And you're going to model for them respect and detachment. I can see that's upsetting you. Maybe we can take some breaths together. So something like that. And again, non-confrontational limit setting. So you might say, again, I just witnessed a teacher last week had a student getting agitated and had thrown some things. And she said, if you will pick up 2, so you didn't have to pick them all up, but if you'll pick up 2, then we can go ahead and do whatever was next on the schedule, which was something that the student enjoyed. So you're kind of using your instinct, pick your battles, because at this point, what you want is to help them move back down that scale where they can participate and learn. You definitely don't want to talk more. You don't want to put hands on. And if you can show them with a visual what it is you're trying to get them to do, that's probably the best way. We talked about this a minute ago. You want to model the behavior. You want to say, I'm getting stressed. I'm going to take some deep breaths. Respecting their dignity is critical. You don't want to make a judgment and you don't want to chastise them at that point in time. Again, it's not productive, and it's just going to make them more anxious and tend to make them accelerate more. Again, you're trying to communicate no emotions. You're modeling relax. You're modeling how to keep that straight line. And not only is that student watching you, but peers are also watching you. If you have other children, you're modeling for them how to operate when behavior starts to escalate. So it's a teaching tool when you're modeling that. You are respecting dignity, which is critical. You're kind of detaching from what's going on. And again, keeping that straight line. So when they get to a 5, which is peak, you've kind of lost the battle, at least in this particular instance. This is when it's all out. And at this point, you're preventing anybody from, trying to prevent property damage. You're trying to prevent the student from hurting himself, or your child from hurting himself or hurting anyone else. So this is like physical aggression, verbal aggression, maybe uncontrollable crying, maybe property destruction, right? And typically this is a short phase because they're like at max. And so typically it can't last that long. They don't have that much energy. And so then they'll begin to come back down the curve, right? So again, the most important thing you can do is manage adult behavior while you're trying to do some of the strategies that we just talked about. So again, staying calm, managing your tension. I've seen school, no slam on school administrators, but I've seen school administrators who think that the thing to do is kind of stand your ground, eye contact, close proximity, that intimidation by proximity. And I can promise you all that tends to do is escalate the behavior, because then the anxiety just gets more and more as it's more confrontational. So you want to respect their space and yours, and you want to suspend judgment. Everybody is going to need some time to process what happened and to come up with some solutions to prevent it for next time. You want to make sure then to de-escalate, you want to make sure they have your attention, but in a way where you're calm, you've got some space between you and them. Again, not judgmental. You might validate these feelings. It seems like you're calmer now. You're starting to calm down. I'm glad to see that. I know this was tough for you. You may want to say nothing. Nothing is always, at this point, a nice thing to do, because it lets everybody start to take a deep breath. You can continue to model any relaxation. If you have visuals, if you have young kids, there's that rainbow. You might have a visual handy where you can use that and model. And I've used it a lot in classrooms, and I'm just sitting doing it. And plenty of times the student has decided then to join in with me in whatever that is. And then restatements to clarify the message. You're starting to be calm. I'm happy to see it. Everything's okay. It's over now. Those kinds of reassuring things. You always want to have a crisis plan if, for when things might get to that. And again, knowing the choreography, your behavior plan should have in it, what are the to-dos and what to avoid in order to try to keep the student, when they begin to escalate, from getting to that peak. So I'm looking at this again. So again, that should last very, very slow. You can see, and we have this for you in the Google Drive. It has your instructions, like when you can redirect, when you should use calming strategies. This is a great, great tool for making sure that your behavior plan is very individualized, because these strategies, although there's some general things to do and not do, can be very specific for your students in terms of, or your children, depending on what their preferences are and their sensory issues are. They may withdraw and get really, really quiet as they're starting to come down, and you need to respect that and act in kind. Sometimes if you watch their behavior, they will tell you what it is they need by what it is they are doing. So you might want to join in with that if they're being quiet. They may start to already make excuses about what happened or whatever. And it's not really the time to get into that with them. So just reassuring them that you'll talk later and that right now everybody's just being calm. They may try to reconcile if this is something that's been an issue. A lot of times they're very sorry. And a lot of times some of this behavior surprises them as much as it surprises you. They may not be that in touch with their own internal cues that they're getting upset. And so frequently at the end of a behavior like this, they're embarrassed, they are sorry, and they immediately will begin to do that. And you can just reassure them that you're going to talk about it later, that right now it's just time to relax and feel better. You want to give time for them to finish calming, give time, give space. And then when they reach recovery, that would be they're back down at that level 1, but they're on the other side of the curve, right? They may not want to talk about the incident. They may be very, very tired or subdued. At some point, you will want to debrief. And once they are in this recovery phase, you can begin to do that. And it's important, right? Because that's the teaching piece. They're now back at a level where they're teachable, right? So you can utilize a couple of things that we'll share with you that are structured ways to do that. But basically, you want to find out, what happened? What upset you? What did you do? Asking them why they did it. What could you do instead next time, right? What could I do to help you next time? We have several versions, and I think I'm going to show you in a minute. Yeah. So the one on the left would be for kids who are not strong readers or maybe too young to read. And the one on right, obviously, is for readers. So these are worksheets, and these are meant to be done with the individual. So on the one on the left, they can circle what happened. And then what you want to do is you want to begin to build some empathy in them. Who was hurt? How do you think they felt? How did you feel? What should I do now? So you also want to start building in restitution. If you did something that hurt somebody, how can you make it okay? And then the other piece is, what should I do next time? Should I walk away? Should I say, stop, please? Should I listen? Should I ask for a break? And those are the things that you will have to probably teach. And you will practice those not in a moment of escalation and acceleration, but you will teach them in a moment of calm. You can role play, you can prime them before difficult activities with just reminding them what the preferred behavior is. This is a visual support called the Incredible 5-Point Scale that I recommend for those of you who have younger kids or younger students. It can just be 3 instead of 5. The example on the right is one that my colleague did with one of the kids. The 5-point scale is a way to make abstract things like anxiety and stress more concrete by assigning numbers and colors to them. And it creates a common language. I have had kids that will, once this is implemented, kids that will come up and go, I'm at a 3. And everybody knows what that means because you've worked through that together. I had a high school kid that we worked with for a long time. And he was missing off the playground for a minute, and we were concerned that he didn't ask to leave the playground. But what happened was he felt himself getting up to a 4. So he went to find a safe person who was on his team, his school team, and said, I'm at a 4. I need a break, rather than getting into physical altercation on the playground. So these are great ways to help students with voice volume, with stress levels, and there's lots of creative ways. And again, ask a LASARD facilitator and we can help you learn how to use this in lots of different ways. It's a great priming tool to remind them, okay, now where do you want to stay? If you get to a 2, what can you do? So you're teaching them self-regulation strategies, which is a life skill, right? This is something that's in your Google Drive. And I love this. This was put together by a project that actually doesn't exist anymore, but it was at the Human Development Center, and they trained school psychologists. And so they got together and did a lot of research and put this together. This is an FBA and BIP checklist, right? This is research-based. This, when you look at, or when you are putting together an FBA and a BIP, if you can check all of these off, it is a super plan. And let me just say that an FBA, a BIP, is a teaching plan. It's not a consequence plan, right? If you have a plan, it should include what the reinforcers are going to be. What is the student going to earn for doing whatever it is you want them to do? Frequently, we will go into schools and we will hear, they never earn their reinforcer. Okay, if you hear that as a parent, or if you hear that in your school, then we need to really look at this behavior plan more closely. There are 3 things that could be happening. One is they aren't capable of the behavior that you're asking them to do without more assistance in the way of prompting, in the way of stepping it out for them. So there are baby steps so they understand what it is you're asking them. That is number 1. Number 2 is what you are considering a reinforcer is not reinforcing to them. It's not worth it. You're asking them for more than they're getting, okay? And the third thing you need to look at is if they're working all week to accomplish some check marks and they don't get that reward till Friday, that's way too long to wait. So those are your 3, I would say, things to look at when behaviors aren't changing like you want them to. They either need more help, they need a different reinforcer, or they need the reinforcer more frequently. So this is in there. So I would really encourage you to take a look at this. Communication tips. You need to look at body language when you're sitting across the table from your school team, or you're a school team sitting across from parents. You want to make sure that you are being the best team member you can be. You want to watch for body language. You want to listen to actually hear what people are saying. You want to be a real good detective and see why they may be saying what they're saying. If there's a point of disagreement, trying to take their perspective so that you can come to terms and come to some agreement about what this behavior plan and your strategies need to look like. You need to ask clarifying questions, and we've given you some scripts here in order to clarify something that you might not understand. And it'll help your team member to supply information that you need, and it'll help you to get better understanding. So one of the things you could say is, can you share your data with me on the behavior you're talking about? So whether you're a school administrator or whether you're a parent and you've got a classroom teacher with issues, you want to see what is the data so that you can help them be a detective about what's going on. Wanting to know what people have tried. Parents, if you're not being asked that, offer that up. You want schools to know, what have you already tried? What's worked? What hasn't worked? Gaining better understanding. Is my child asking for help from a teacher or peer when he doesn't understand? Because that might be a problem, right? Maybe the behavior results when he doesn't understand and he doesn't have the communication skills to ask for help. So instead, he's getting upset. Clarifying questions also keep the conversation going, that back and forth. And that's what you want. As long as you're talking and communicating, you're going to be making progress, right? And if you clarify the information, it gives people more information to know whether they agree or disagree with what's going on. So just some questions to ask, ways to ask questions that are more positive and really more probative. So you might say to your school team, can I ask a few questions to be clear about the facts that are being presented? Maybe you are really wanting to see your child more engaged in that classroom. And so you say, what are her peers doing during that time? So that you can open up the conversation to what are some modifications, accommodations that are going to put my child doing similar or the same activities as typical peers. So showing a sincere desire to understand. So we've agreed on, and I can't read it, but saying we've agreed on this, what kind of data will we keep so that we can come back together and know if it's working or not. Okay. We can move to the next slide. One example, if as a family member, you are something that you want is you're hitting a roadblock, a good way to probe that is to say, what would it take to help Kelly transition to her classes? So you're opening it up, to what kinds of supports would we need? It's a real positive way to broach that conversation. Or can you help me understand? What are your concerns about trying what I'm asking you to try? And that lets you know what their perspective is and where they're coming from so that you can brainstorm some solutions to come to some agreement. Keeping the focus on your child if you're the parent, instead of saying, I really want her to have, one-on-one speech 2 times a week. You could say she needs to be able to communicate her wants and needs in all environments. What kinds of supports can we put in place? Because it may be that that's not the best way for that student to learn how to communicate. It may be that, being part of routines and being with peers is the best way. And so maybe push-in is the best way, right? Helping facilitate give and take communication among your child or student with peers. Remember that IDA entitles your child to what is appropriate, a free and appropriate education. So, it may not be a Cadillac, but they're not obliged to give you a Cadillac. But I think you can come to some good solutions by asking some of these questions. What would it take to have the teacher and para support Joseph to use his communication device? Lots of times we go into classroom settings and that device is in the backpack or that device is on the shelf. So to say, what's it going to take for him or her to be able to have access to that device in all the environments of the day? Because that's her voice, right? Okay, so conflict is growth trying to happen. We're about to wrap up. So I found this a few years ago looking for to do a webinar on collaboration. And I really, really like it. This is in your Google Drive as well. So when you reach an impasse, this is a way to know just how much you agree or disagree, rather than just I'm in this camp and I'm in this camp. And so I like it because it says, again, keeping the child's needs, focusing on what you agree, restate opinions using I statements, make sure your body language is positive, and you might consider agreeing with something for a short period of time if it's not harmful, and making sure that you say, what are the stipulations? I agree to that if we will keep data and if we can come together in X amount of time to look at it again. So the graphic there says, I might be at a 1, unqualified, yes. I have no concerns, I'm ready to move forward. Or you might be at a 3, I can live with it under certain conditions, like we just said. Or I need more information. So this is a way for people to actually learn more about the degree to which you agree and disagree, and gives you more of a vehicle to move forward rather than just camping in extremes of viewpoint. Okay, a little progress each day adds up to big results. And wrap up, right? So we went through behavior basics, right? All behavior is trying to tell you something, and if it's persisting, there is something that's supporting it in the environment, and you're the detective that needs to find that out. There are certain behavior do's and don'ts, things that you can do to keep that behavior from escalating. We talked about that. And some things that you do not want to do that will generally escalate that behavior, right? We talked about key components of quality FBAs and BIPs. We did not go through those line by line, but you have that and you can go through that. You can contact us if you have questions about it. We gave you a few communication tips to keep your interactions between school and family a little more positive and productive. And we shared with you a few resources that you can use when dealing with behavior. So now briefly go back to the self-assessment we had you look at the beginning. You rated yourself on a Likert from 1 to 5 about your knowledge about behavior. We want you to just take a minute and see, did you move up in any way on that scale? We hope you did. And now we have just a minute or two for questions. We'd be happy to stay on. I know it's 11 o'clock. Tracy and I will be happy to stay on if somebody has questions. And thank you for participating with us. We enjoyed it. Oh, and don't forget to go to our website. Those resources are free to you. There's a tab for families, and there are visual supports that you can just print and use. And if you don't mind taking a minute to access this QR code, we'd love to have you complete a very, very brief satisfaction survey, because we're always wanting feedback to see how we can make these presentations even better.
Wallace, do you see any questions in the chat?
No, there were no questions in the chat.
Okay. Well,
Maybe somebody had, oh, wait, there
There.
seems to be a couple more very clear explanations. Oh, good. Just some positive comments.
yeah, y'all are awesome. I thank y'all so much for
Right
hosting
now
this
there's a
webinar.
black, oh, now it's gone. There was a black box in the way.
Yeah, I have had that black box periodically, but you know, I just worked around it.
Well, I thank y'all so much, Miss Chris and Tracy.
Welcome.
I really hope you guys learned a lot of valuable, informative information. I know I did. If you do have any additional questions, you can always call us here at the office, or you can reach out to LASARD. I think, yeah, there's our contact information right there. We ask that you please take a minute to complete our surveys. I think they have one, and then Wallace may have put ours in the chat as well. And if not, you'll receive one in an email after the webinar is over. But if y'all don't have any further questions, y'all have a great weekend. And like I said, thanks again for attending our webinar today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
Bye-bye.
y'all. You did amazing.
Bye.